Ridge Forrester has always believed that strength is measured by control. Control over circumstance, over emotion, over the inevitable chaos that follows when people refuse to accept reality. For most of his life, this belief has guided his decisions, especially the most painful ones. When he forced Eric into retirement, Ridge told himself that he was acting out of love, out of responsibility, out of a son's duty to protect a father who no longer seemed willing to protect himself. He framed the decision as medical necessity, as compassion disguised as authority. Yet beneath that justification lay something far more complex and far more dangerous: Ridge's terror of watching the man who built everything slowly break down in front of him. Eric's health had become the unspoken argument in every room. His exhaustion, his stubborn refusal to slow down, his determination to remain relevant in a world already planning for his absence, all of it frightened Ridge in ways he never admitted aloud. To Ridge, forcing Eric to step aside felt like choosing certainty over risk. It was easier to manage his father's career than to confront the possibility of losing him entirely. Power, after all, is often most seductive when it pretends to be protection. For a time, Ridge convinced himself that he had made the right decision. Eric was resting. The company continued to function. The chaos Ridge feared did not immediately materialize. Yet the absence of disaster did not bring peace. Instead, it left behind a quiet discomfort that Ridge buried beneath work, routine, and the relentless forward motion that had always shielded him from self-reflection. He avoided thinking about the look in Eric's eyes when the decision was finalized, the mix of hurt, disbelief, and resignation that no amount of rational explanation could erase. Then the crisis comes not to Eric but to Ridge himself. It does not arrive in a way that feels narratively fair. There is no warning that mirrors the ones Ridge once used against his father. No gradual decline that allows for preparation. It is sudden, disorienting, and deeply personal. Whether it manifests as a previously undetected illness or an unexpected accident hardly matters in the moment. What matters is the immediate collapse of certainty. Ridge's body, the very vessel he trusted to carry him through endless responsibility, betrays him without apology. Strength dissolves into fragility with alarming speed. In the sterile quiet of a hospital room, Ridge experiences something entirely unfamiliar: helplessness without leverage. He cannot negotiate with his condition. He cannot override it with authority or dismiss it as someone else's problem. For the first time, his health is not an abstract concern used to justify decisions. It is a reality he must inhabit. Every breath feels deliberate. Every sensation carries uncertainty. The future he once planned with confidence now appears conditional, dependent on forces beyond his control. This reversal forces Ridge into an uncomfortable intimacy with fear. He begins to understand, not intellectually but viscerally, what Eric must have felt when his health was used as an argument rather than a conversation. Ridge remembers how quickly others spoke about his father's well-being as though it were a strategy rather than a lived experience. Now, as doctors speak in cautious terms and loved ones watch him with restrained anxiety, Ridge recognizes the subtle violence of being discussed instead of heard. Guilt follows swiftly, heavier than pain. It settles into Ridge's chest with a persistence he cannot shake. He replays his decision regarding Eric again and again, but now the context has shifted. What once felt necessary now feels arrogant. He realizes that he never truly asked Eric what he wanted in that moment. He assumed. He decided. He acted. In doing so, Ridge denied his father the dignity of choice, mistaking fear-driven control for care. Lying still, stripped of the distractions that once defined his days, Ridge confronts a truth he has long avoided. Vulnerability does not diminish authority, it humanizes it. Eric's refusal to step away had not been recklessness, but defiance against erasure. Ridge understands now that health crises do not automatically strip a person of purpose or clarity. Sometimes they sharpen it. Sometimes they demand conversation, not command. As Ridge's condition stabilizes but remains uncertain, the emotional balance within the Forrester family shifts once again. Eric, once positioned as the fragile one, becomes the observer. He watches his son navigate the very fear he once faced, and the irony is not lost on him. Yet Eric does not gloat. He does not claim vindication. Instead, he feels something quieter and more complicated. Sorrow that this is what it took for Ridge to understand. The company, too, feels the tremor. Forrester Creations has always mirrored the health of its leaders, and with Ridge suddenly vulnerable, the illusion of permanence fractures. Conversations once held behind closed doors now carry urgency. Succession, leadership, and long-term vision no longer feel theoretical. They feel immediate. Ridge realizes, with painful clarity, that his push to control the future came from fear of instability rather than trust in resilience. This realization does not absolve him. It humbles him. Ridge begins to reconsider the meaning of leadership itself. True leadership, he now sees, is not about preventing decline at all costs, but about honoring autonomy even in uncertainty. It is about allowing space for wisdom to coexist with weakness, for experience to matter even when physical limits emerge. Eric's insistence on remaining involved was never a denial of reality. It was a demand to be seen as whole. Facing his own mortality, however briefly, Ridge recognizes how easily power can become a shield against empathy. He had chosen efficiency over dialogue, decisiveness over compassion. Now, confronted with his own fragility, those choices feel unbearably small. If Ridge recovers fully, he will not emerge unchanged. Illness has a way of carving truth into the psyche. It strips away illusion and leaves behind what cannot be ignored. Ridge will have to decide whether he allows this experience to transform him or merely frighten him. He can return to control, to justification, to authority untouched by reflection, or he can choose something far more difficult: humility. His decision regarding Eric no longer feels final. It feels unfinished. Whether Ridge apologizes openly or changes course quietly, the reckoning has already begun. He understands now that forcing someone aside does not preserve legacy, it fractures it. Legacy survives through respect, through shared vision, through the courage to listen even when listening feels dangerous. In the end, Ridge's health crisis does not weaken him. It exposes him. It forces him to confront the truth that strength without empathy is brittle, and authority without understanding is hollow. What happens next, between father and son, between past and future, between control and trust, will determine not only the fate of Forrester Creations, but the moral center of the family itself. The accident does not leave room for interpretation. It is not a scare, not a warning meant to humble, without consequence. Ridge Forrester's condition deteriorates with alarming speed, transforming fear into panic and uncertainty into immediate crisis. The injuries are severe enough that time itself becomes the enemy. Machines take over what his body can no longer manage on its own, and the steady rhythm of his life is replaced by the artificial cadence of monitors and alarms. Strength, once assumed permanent, is reduced to fragile biological negotiation. News spreads quickly through the Forrester family, not as gossip, but as shock. The irony is brutal. The man who forced his father to step aside in the name of health is now fighting for his own life. The reversal is so complete it feels almost scripted by fate itself. Doctors speak in cautious, measured language, but the gravity is unmistakable. Ridge is no longer simply injured. He is critical. Survival is no longer guaranteed. Eric arrives at the hospital carrying a weight that no one can ease. Watching his son motionless, dependent, suspended between life and death, fractures something deep within him. The anger he once carried dissolves into something far more painful: helpless love. Eric recognizes the posture of vulnerability immediately. It is the same vulnerability Ridge refused to acknowledge in him, the same one that was translated into control instead of compassion. Now, there is no room for power struggles, no space for pride. There is only the unbearable possibility of loss. As hours pass, the family gathers in a tense silence that feels heavier than argument ever did. Brooke's composure cracks under the pressure of waiting, her strength tested not by confrontation, but by uncertainty. Steffi and Thomas, both accustomed to navigating crisis, find themselves powerless in a way that no corporate threat has ever made them feel. There is no strategy for this.
No le verí.
No solution that can be forced through willpower alone. The family that once revolved around Ridge now orbits an empty hospital bed, praying for signs that his body will fight as fiercely as his mind always has. Forrester Creations begins to feel the impact almost immediately. With Ridge incapacitated and Eric emotionally compromised, the company enters a state of suspended authority. Decisions are delayed. Confidence falters. Employees sense that something fundamental has shifted, even if they do not yet understand how deep the fracture runs. Leadership, once rigidly defined, suddenly feels provisional. The illusion that power is stable collapses under the weight of human fragility. Eric, sitting vigil beside his son, is forced into a reckoning he never wanted but can no longer avoid. He remembers the moment Ridge insisted retirement was necessary, framed as protection, delivered as command. He remembers the humiliation of being discussed rather than consulted, reduced to a risk factor instead of a man with agency. And now, faced with Ridge's vulnerability, Eric understands the cruelty of certainty imposed without empathy. The pain of being overridden is not intellectual. It is visceral. Watching Ridge now, Eric knows his son never intended harm, but intention offers no comfort when consequences are irreversible. As Ridge's condition worsens, doctors prepare the family for outcomes no one wants to hear. The possibility of permanent damage looms, not only physical but cognitive. The man who once controlled every room he entered may never return to the same state of authority. This realization sends shockwaves through everyone who has relied on Ridge's decisiveness to anchor their world. The question is no longer whether Ridge will lead again, but whether he will ever be able to lead at all. In this fragile space, Eric begins to change. The bitterness that once fueled his resistance fades, replaced by clarity sharpened by grief before the loss has even occurred. He sees now that legacy cannot be defended through rigidity. It must be guided through understanding. If Ridge survives, the relationship between father and son can never return to what it was. Something has already been broken. But something else, unexpected and fragile, has also been created: the possibility of humility. As machines breathe for Ridge, Eric makes a decision of his own. Not one driven by fear or ego, but by responsibility. He realizes that the company cannot remain frozen, waiting for certainty that may never come. And more importantly, he understands that leadership built solely on control has already proven dangerous. Whether Ridge recovers or not, Forrester Creations must evolve beyond the illusion that strength means dominance. This is the moment Eric truly reclaims his role, not as an executive clinging to power, but as a steward of meaning. He begins to consider changes that once seemed unthinkable: restructuring authority, sharing leadership rather than centralizing it, preparing the company not for continuity at all costs, but for resilience in uncertainty. The crisis forces him to act not as a rival to his son, but as a father determined to prevent the same mistake from repeating again. Meanwhile, Ridge drifts in and out of consciousness, caught in a space where memory and regret blur together. In fleeting moments of awareness, fragments surface: his father's face, unfinished conversations, the echo of his own certainty now rendered hollow. Whether these moments will remain with him if he survives is unclear. But even in his unconscious state, Ridge is confronting the cost of control without compassion. The body remembers what the mind once refused to acknowledge. The accident has changed everything. Not through spectacle, but through exposure. It has stripped the Forrester family of illusion and forced them to face the truth that power does not protect against loss. Authority does not guarantee wisdom. And decisions made without listening carry consequences that cannot always be undone. As the night stretches on and Ridge's condition remains perilous, the future of both the family and the company hangs suspended. Nothing is resolved. Nothing is secure. But one truth is undeniable: if Ridge survives, he will return to a world that no longer sees him as invincible. And if he does not, Forrester Creations will be forced to redefine itself without the man who once believed he could control its destiny. Either way, the accident marks a point of no return. The era of certainty is over. What comes next will be shaped not by who holds power, but by who has learned, too late or just in time, the cost of ignoring fragility. Thomas Forrester's disappearance is not marked by chaos or immediate alarm. At first, it registers as absence rather than emergency, the kind that can be rationalized away by those accustomed to his volatility and tendency to isolate when overwhelmed. Missed calls are attributed to emotional withdrawal. Unanswered messages are dismissed as avoidance. In a family conditioned by years of turmoil, silence does not immediately signal danger. It simply feels familiar. Yet beneath that familiarity, something is wrong. The absence stretches longer than expected, and the unease begins to thicken, turning routine concern into a creeping dread no one wants to name aloud. What the Forresters do not yet know is that Thomas's disappearance was engineered with deliberate precision. This was not an impulsive act, nor a crime of opportunity. It was planned, executed by someone who knew Thomas well enough to anticipate his movements, his weaknesses, and the moments when he would be most vulnerable. Whether this captor is a new figure emerging from the shadows or a rival Thomas believed he had already survived, the truth is equally unsettling. Someone has been watching, waiting, and preparing for the moment when Thomas could be taken without immediate consequence. Thomas awakens not to pain, but to disorientation. Time fractures around him, stripped of context and continuity. The space he is held in is deliberately impersonal, designed to erase any sense of place. There are no windows, no familiar sounds, no markers that might allow him to measure passing hours. Isolation becomes its own weapon, more effective than physical restraint. His captor understands that Thomas's greatest vulnerability has never been his strength or ambition, but his mind, its tendency to spiral, to relive guilt, to fracture under pressure. This captivity is not merely about control. It is about breaking him down slowly, forcing him to confront the parts of himself he has spent years trying to bury. As days pass, Thomas begins to realize that this is not a ransom situation. No demands are made. No threats are communicated outward. The silence itself is the message. Whoever is holding him does not want money. They want something far more personal, reckoning. The captivity is psychological, designed to extract something Thomas alone possesses: knowledge, guilt, or a truth that has remained hidden for too long. Every moment of isolation sharpens the realization that this is connected to his past, to the unresolved damage he has caused and the enemies he assumed were gone. Back in Los Angeles, the Forrester family's unease escalates into panic. Ridge, already physically fragile from his own recent trauma, feels the loss of Thomas like a reopening wound. The guilt he carries from his accident compounds with a father's terror that history is repeating itself, that his family is once again being torn apart by forces he cannot control. Eric senses immediately that this is not coincidence. Too much has gone wrong too quickly. Ridge's accident, the fractures within the company, now Thomas's disappearance. Patterns emerge where randomness was once assumed. Steffi reacts differently. Her fear is sharpened by instinct rather than speculation. She knows Thomas's patterns intimately, and this silence does not fit any of them. She understands, with a clarity that chills her, that Thomas has not chosen this isolation. He has been removed. This realization ignites something fierce within her, transforming fear into resolve. She refuses to wait for confirmation while time slips away. Every hour Thomas remains missing increases the likelihood that this situation is far more dangerous than anyone wants to admit. The investigation begins quietly, then accelerates. Security footage reveals gaps too precise to be accidental. Digital traces suggest deliberate misdirection. Someone wanted Thomas to vanish without triggering immediate alarms. As pieces come together, a horrifying possibility takes shape. This kidnapping is not an isolated act, but part of something larger. The person behind it understands the Forrester family intimately. Their history, their secrets, their blind spots. This is not about Thomas alone. He is a key piece in a much broader design. The revelation of Thomas's location comes not through luck, but through pressure. A fragment of evidence surfaces, something overlooked, something only meaningful to those who know Thomas's past intimately. When the location is finally identified, it shocks the family not only because of where Thomas is being held, but because of what that place represents. It is tied to an old wound, a chapter the Foresters believed was closed. The captor has chosen this site deliberately, turning geography into accusation. As the truth emerges, the motive becomes clearer and more disturbing. This is not revenge in its simplest form. It is exposure. The captor believes Thomas represents a crime that was never fully answered for, a moral debt that remains unpaid. By imprisoning him, they are forcing the family to confront a narrative they tried to control. Thomas is not merely a victim in this scenario. He is evidence, and his suffering is being used to force acknowledgement of a deeper corruption that extends far beyond him. The rescue mission is launched under impossible conditions. Time is limited. The location is dangerous. The captor is prepared. Every decision carries risk, not only to Thomas's life, but to those attempting to save him. Rich insists on being involved despite his weakened state, driven by a need to atone for what he believes is a pattern of failure. Eric opposes this, not out of control, but out of fear of losing yet another son. The family fractures once more under the weight of conflicting instincts, action versus caution, guilt versus survival. Meanwhile, Thomas's captivity intensifies. His captor no longer hides their purpose. They force him to confront memories he has suppressed, actions he justified, harm he minimized. The psychological pressure becomes unbearable, designed to extract confession rather than compliance. Thomas begins to understand that his survival may depend not on resistance, but on truth. Truth he has never fully faced himself. The realization is devastating. He is not being held because of who he is now, but because of who he was when he believed he could escape consequence. When the rescue finally unfolds, it is anything but clean. The danger is immediate, visceral, and chaotic. The family's worst fears materialize as they realize how close they came to losing Thomas permanently. The mission exposes not only the physical threat, but the emotional cost of years spent ignoring unresolved trauma. Thomas is found alive, but altered. Survival has not spared him transformation. He returns bearing the weight of what was forced into the open. The aftermath is as destabilizing as the kidnapping itself. The conspiracy does not end with Thomas's release. The evidence uncovered during the rescue points to a network of manipulation tied to past decisions made by the Foresters, decisions that protected the family at the expense of accountability. The captor was not acting alone. They were a symptom of something festering beneath the surface, something that will not disappear simply because Thomas has been saved. For the Forester family, the shock is existential. They must confront the possibility that their legacy has been built not only on creativity and power, but on silence and selective truth. Thomas's disappearance becomes the catalyst for a reckoning they can no longer avoid. The question is no longer whether they can protect their own, but whether they are willing to face the consequences of what protection has cost others. In the end, Thomas's captivity exposes a truth more dangerous than any enemy, that the past, when buried rather than healed, does not stay buried. It waits. It watches. And when it returns, it does so with precision, forcing the living to answer for the choices they believed time had erased.